There's a question I want to begin with. It's simple, but if you take it seriously, it has the power to change your life. What do you think about most of the time? Is it stress? Is it success? Is it fear? Is it hope? Because whether we like it or not, what we constantly think about, what we obsess over, what we replay in our minds, what we dwell on when no one's watching is shaping us. It's not a motivational quote. It's a psychological and biological reality. Let me tell you a story a few years ago. I met a young man who wanted to build a business. He had all the tools, skills, network, talent. But every time he sat down to work, his mind was flooded with thoughts like, what if I fail? What will people think? I'm not ready yet. What we think about most isn't just noise in our heads, it's the foundation of who we are. Our dominant thoughts create a lens through which we see the world. They influence the way we interpret experiences, how we perceive other people, and more importantly, how we perceive ourselves. Over time, this mental pattern solidifies and becomes identity. Not because someone else labeled us, but because we continually reinforce those ideas in our own minds. Think about this. When a person constantly tells themselves, I'm not good at speaking, what happens? They start to avoid situations where they need to speak. When they do speak, they're nervous, self-conscious, and reserved not because they lack skill, but because their thoughts have already told their brain that this isn't who they are. And what do they take away from that experience? More proof that they aren't good at speaking. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The brain doesn't challenge our repetitive thoughts. It accepts them as commands. If you continually think about how people might not like you, your brain will begin to interpret neutral behavior from others as rejection. If you consistently think you're a failure, mind will filter out your wins and magnify your mistakes. Your perception becomes distorted by your thinking patterns, and over time, those patterns become your reality. This isn't just a psychological phenomenon, it's also neurological. The brain builds connections between frequently used thoughts, creating neural pathways. The more you use a certain pathway, say thoughts of inadequacy or fear, the stronger and more automatic it becomes. Eventually, your brain starts defaulting to those pathways without even realizing it. That's how thoughts turn into identity. The tragedy is, most of us don't choose these dominant thoughts. They come from past experiences, childhood environments, cultural messages, and moments of pain. But just because they came from the past doesn't mean they need to define the future. We can take ownership of our thinking. And in doing so, we begin to take ownership of who we are becoming. Let's say someone starts to shift their internal script from I'm not good enough to I'm learning and growing every day. That one thought, when repeated often enough, doesn't just sound good, it begins to change the way they act. It allows them to take more risks, to see failure as feedback, and to step into opportunities they previously avoided. As a result, their behaviors change. Their habits change. Eventually, their identity follows. We tend to underestimate how powerful a single thought can be when repeated with consistency. It's like planting a seed. At first, it's like visible. Nothing happens. But if it's watered and nurtured, it eventually breaks through the surface and becomes something visible, something real. That's what your dominant thoughts do. They begin underground, but with enough time, they shape everything above ground. You are not your job, your past, or your circumstances. You are the product of the thoughts you rehearse the most. And the good news is those thoughts can be chosen. They can be shifted. And when they shift, everything else begins to follow. Because your identity is not fixed, it's forged day by day in the quiet space between your ears. Every action we take begins as a thought. Before we speak a word, make a decision, or form a habit, there's a moment of intention, an internal voice guiding us consciously or unconsciously. That's why the real origin of behavior isn't in what we do, it's in what we believe and think. Our thoughts are the root, and our actions are the fruit. If we want to change what we're doing, we must first examine what we're thinking. This idea explains why so many people struggle to maintain lasting change. They try to change behaviors without addressing the mindset underneath. It's like cutting off the leaves of a weed while leaving the root intact. It looks better for a while, but the problem always grows back. That's why diets fail, resolutions fade, and motivation burns out because we often focus on external performance rather than internal programming. Let's consider someone trying to become more confident. They start by forcing themselves to speak up more or take on challenges. That's great, but if they're still thinking, I don't belong here or I'm not worthy, then their actions are out of alignment with their inner narrative. Eventually, that misalignment creates stress, inconsistency, and a return to the old pattern. But when that same person starts feeding their mind thoughts like, I bring value, I'm growing, or I deserve to take up space, something shifts. Their actions begin to reflect those new thoughts, not just because they're forcing it, but because they believe it. Every action is just a visible reflection of an invisible belief. When we feel overwhelmed, it's often not because we have too much to do, it's because our thoughts are telling us we're not capable. When we procrastinate, it's rarely about laziness. More often, it's rooted in fear of failure or a belief that we're not ready. The action is just the symptom. The thought is the cause. And this doesn't apply only to individuals. It applies to teams, cultures, and organizations. If a workplace constantly talks about innovation, but everyone's afraid to speak up, it's not the actions that are off, it's the underlying belief system. People act in ways that match what they think is safe, accepted, or possible. Change the narrative, and the behavior follows. That's why leaders, parents, and mentors who want to guide others effectively must first help them examine the stories they're telling themselves. If someone believes they're just average, it doesn't matter how many opportunities they get, they'll subconsciously sabotage them to match the identity they hold. But if that belief is challenged and redefined, they begin to act differently. They make different choices. They build new habits. And eventually they produce different results. You don't grow an apple tree by painting apples on a branch. You grow it by planting the right seed and nurturing the root. It's the same with people. We can't just modify our schedules, our behaviors, or our environment and expect transformation. We have to start at the core with our thinking. The most empowered people are not the ones who work the hardest or know the most. They're the ones who have mastered their inner world. They recognize that every action flows from belief, and every belief begins with a thought. They tend to the root, knowing that in time the fruit will follow. When we change our thoughts, we change the source. And when the source changes, everything downstream begins to shift naturally, authentically, and sustainably. Because the fruit of our lives will always reflect the root of our minds, there's a part of your brain called the Reticular Activating System, or RAS. Most people have never heard of it, yet it plays a powerful role in shaping how we experience the world. It's not something you control consciously, but it's working every second of every day, acting like a mental filter. And this filter determines what you notice, what you ignore, and ultimately what kind of reality you live in. The Reticular Activating System is a bundle of nerves located at the base of your brainstem. Its job is to sort through the millions of pieces of information you're exposed to every day and decide what actually gets your attention. You might not realize it, but your brain is constantly being bombarded sights, sounds, smells, conversations, headlines, messages, emotions. You can't focus on all of it, so the RAS steps in and says, here's what's important. Focus on this. But how does it decide what's important? Simple. It listens to what you think about most. If you're constantly thinking about how people don't respect you, your RAS will start highlighting every small sign of disrespect, even if it was never intended that way. If you believe opportunities are scarce, you'll overlook new ones even when they're right in front of you. On the other hand, if you're focused on growth, learning, and connection, your RAS will begin showing you more moments that align with those values. It will help you notice people, places, and resources that support that mindset. It's like tuning into a radio frequency. Whatever station you're locked onto, that's what you'll hear even though hundreds of other stations are playing at the same time. The information you focus on is only a small slice of reality, but it feels like the whole picture because your RAS is tuning everything else out. Here's an example you've probably experienced. Have you ever decided to buy a specific car, and suddenly you start seeing that exact car everywhere? Did everyone suddenly go out and buy the same car overnight? Of course not. Your brain just tuned into a new frequency. The cars were always there, you just never noticed them until your mind told your RAS, that matters now. The implications of this are huge because it means that what you choose to focus on, what you repeat to yourself, what you believe, what you dwell on literally alters your perception of reality. Not metaphorically. Literally. Your brain starts filtering the world through that lens. This is why negative thinking becomes a trap. If you walk around thinking people are selfish, untrustworthy, or out to get you, your RAS will highlight every moment that seems to confirm that belief. It will block out the kindness, the generosity, cooperation. You'll think the world is cruel not because it is, but because your brain is showing you only one part of it. But the good news is the same mechanism works in the opposite direction. When you intentionally feed your mind with empowering thoughts like gratitude, purpose, and possibility, your RAS starts working for you. It begins filtering your environment for people and situations that reinforce those positive patterns. You start noticing solutions instead of just problems. You start seeing open doors instead of walls. You don't have to control the reticular activating system directly. You just have to control your focus. Your repeated thoughts are like instructions, telling your brain what to pay attention to. So if your life feels stuck, it may not be your circumstances, it may be your filter. And if you want to change your reality, start by changing what you teach your brain to. Notice. Because the world hasn't changed, only your awareness of it has. Fear and self-doubt aren't just fleeting emotions, they are loops, cycles. Patterns of thought that, once triggered, tend to repeat themselves over and over again. The worst part is that these loops feel familiar, safe even, not because they're healthy, but because they're habitual. And like all habits, they get stronger the more we engage with them. When someone feels afraid or unsure of themselves, the natural instinct is to pull back, to delay, to hesitate. They tell themselves, I'm not ready yet, or what if I fail? These thoughts seem reasonable in the moment, even protective. But what they really do is reinforce the idea that the person isn't capable. And every time they give in to that voice, the loop strengthens. It becomes easier to doubt next time, easier to back away, easier to believe the same limiting story. Fear and self-doubt are not caused by circumstances alone. Two people can be in the exact same situation, same stage of life, same challenge ahead, and one will rise while the other retreats. The difference isn't in the opportunity. It's in the interpretation. It's in the narrative playing in the mind. One sees a chance to grow. The other sees a chance to fail. And whichever loop gets triggered becomes the path they follow. The mind loves consistency. It doesn't like gaps between belief and behavior. So when a person believes they're not enough, their actions will try to confirm it. If they succeed at something, they'll find a way to downplay it. If they get praised, they'll brush it off. Because the belief loop running in their mind can't handle a new narrative. It feels uncomfortable, even threatening. But here's the truth: fear and self-doubt are liars. They speak in the language of certainty, even when they're based on nothing. That's what makes them so powerful. They don't come to you saying you might fail. They whisper you will fail. They don't suggest maybe people won't like you. They insist no one will respect you. That false certainty is what convinces us to shrink back. It makes fiction feel like fact. And yet, every time someone pushes past the loop, every time they act in spite of fear, speak up despite doubt, they weaken the cycle. They prove to themselves that the story wasn't true. That fear was just noise. That self-doubt was just an echo from a past they've outgrown. But that proof only comes after action, not before. This is where most people get stuck. They wait for the fear to go away before moving. But the fear doesn't disappear until you move. It's like fog on a road. It doesn't lift until you start driving. The clarity, the confidence, the belief in yourself, it doesn't come from thinking your way out. It comes from stepping forward and showing yourself what's actually possible. We often forget that the mind is trainable. Just like a muscle, it responds to repetition. If you repeatedly give in to fear, that response becomes your default. But if you consistently lean into courage, even in small ways, you start building new loops. Loops of resilience. Loops of self-trust. And over time, those loops start to replace the old ones. It's not about erasing fear and self-doubt completely. That's not realistic. But it is about recognizing them for what they are, mental habits, not truths. And once you see them that way, you no longer have to obey them. You can notice the loop and still move forward. You can feel fear and still act with purpose. Because fear and self-doubt may speak loudly, but they don't get to decide who you become. Most people understand the importance of eating well. We know that what we put into our bodies affects our energy, our health, our performance. Junk in, junk out. But what many overlook is that the same principle applies to the mind. Just as your physical body is shaped by the food you consume, your mental and emotional well-being is shaped by the information, ideas, and thoughts you allow into your head. You can't always control what happens to you, but you can choose your mental diet. The thoughts you feed your mind every day are not neutral. They are building something. They are either lifting you up or weighing you down. When you spend your time consuming negativity, whether it's through the news, toxic conversations, or your own self-talk, those things begin to shape your worldview. Not just what you see, but how you see it. And over time, the way you think becomes automatic. Just like how a diet full of sugar or processed foods becomes your new normal. So too does a mental diet full of fear, criticism, or comparison. The problem is that mental junk food is everywhere. Social media can flood your mind with insecurity. The 24-hour news cycle thrives on fear and outrage. Even the people you spend time with, if they're constantly complaining, doubting, or gossiping, can become a steady drip of negativity into your subconscious. And just like you wouldn't sit down and eat fast food 5 times a day and expect to feel healthy, you can't absorb mental clutter constantly and expect to feel peaceful or motivated. But here's the empowering truth: you get to choose what you consume. You can choose what you read, what you watch, what you listen to, and who you surround yourself with. You can decide whether your internal dialogue is filled with criticism or compassion. You can choose to spend time with people who challenge and uplift you, who believe in your potential and not just your past. Think of your mental diet like a garden. If you fill it with weeds, negative content, anxious thoughts, toxic conversations, that's all that will grow. But if you plant seeds of growth, gratitude, purpose, and truth, those seeds will eventually bloom. It doesn't happen overnight. Just like with physical health, mental fitness is built through daily intentional choices. Start your day with thoughts that ground you. Read something inspiring instead of scrolling. Listen to a podcast that helps you grow instead of one that stirs outrage. Write down what you're thankful for before your mind fills with worry. These are small habits, but they carry massive impact over time. Because they're not just changing your mood, they're training your mind. And that's the goal, to train your mind, not just entertain it. To nourish it, not just fill it. Because a strong, healthy mind isn't something that just happens. It's something that's built through repetition, discipline, and attention to what you're consuming. When your mental diet is full of courage, perspective, and self-belief, you start to act differently. You carry yourself differently. You respond to challenges with more clarity. You're less reactive, more intentional. You begin to lead yourself rather than be led by emotion or distraction. So the question is simple: what are you feeding your mind? Because your mind is always eating. And eventually what you feed it becomes what you think, what you feel, and how you lived out. Wishing is easy. It takes no effort to dream about success, confidence, peace, or happiness. We all do it. We all imagine the version of ourselves that has it all figured out, who wakes up motivated, who walks into rooms with certainty, who accomplishes goals effortlessly. But here's the truth: you don't become what you wish for, you become what you focus on. It's not about what you hope will happen. It's about what you consistently direct your energy toward, day after day. Focus is powerful. It's like sunlight through a magnifying glass. Diffused, it does nothing. But focused, it can start a fire. In the same way, your thoughts, your energy, and your time, when scattered across dozens of vague desires, rarely produce results. But when that attention is focused, when you fix your mind on a specific goal, behavior, or growth area, transformation begins to take shape. Slowly, quietly, but steadily. The problem is that many people confuse interest with commitment. They're interested in change. They're interested in building discipline or creating impact. But their focus tells another story. Their mind is divided half on their goals, half on their doubts, half on the future, half stuck in the past. And so their energy is diluted. Nothing gains traction. They wait for motivation to show up. They hope for the right time, but they don't direct their focus with intention. And without focus, the wish remains just that, a wish. What you focus on becomes familiar. What becomes familiar feels safe. And what feels safe becomes your habit. If you keep focusing on what's wrong with your life, you're bright. We'll keep finding more of it. If you constantly focus on the ways you failed, you'll reinforce an identity that stays stuck. But if you choose to focus on progress, even if it's small, that becomes your new baseline. If you focus on effort, learning, and forward movement, your mind adapts to that rhythm. It begins to expect growth. It starts to assume capability. That's why people who achieve meaningful things aren't just dreamers, they're focusers. They narrow their mental energy. They don't just say, I want to be more confident. They focus on showing up fully in the meeting today. They don't say, I want to be fit. They focus on making the next healthy decision. Over time, those focus moments accumulate. And slowly, they become someone who is confident, someone who is fit, someone who follows through. Wishing can be comforting. It lets us imagine without risk, but focus is different. Focus requires presence. It demands that we step into discomfort, that we ignore distractions, that we revisit the same goal again and again, even when we feel like giving up. Focus builds trust with yourself. Every time you return your attention to something meaningful, whether that's a habit, a purpose, or a mission, you're training your mind. You're telling yourself this matters. And eventually your life begins to reflect that focus. You don't need to wish harder. You don't need a perfect plan. What you need is to decide what's worthy of your focus and then return to it again and again, even when it's boring, even when it's hard, even when it feels like nothing is changing. Because the results don't come immediately, but they do come eventually. Your future isn't shaped by your fantasies, it's shaped by your focus. So ask yourself, what am I focusing on? Because whatever it is, that's who I'm becoming.